Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here. Alright, I am here with the next episode of the Ranking of King, and this time we are taking a look at Desperation. Desperation was published in 1996, first published. And it is one of King's capital G good versus capital E evil books. This is a big epic confrontation book. In one corner we have Tak, which is kind of this ancient presence of evil. It's described in the novel as being more of a disease than a spirit or a god. It's a kind of presence that can control vermin and beasts, and it also has the power to possess the bodies of the dead. And then in the other corner, we have a boy named David. This is kind of like, the allegory is pretty on the nose here. It's kind of a David and Goliath story. David is a conduit for what appears to be the Christian God, or at least a version of the Christian God, in all of its mysterious and often cruel ways. And that is something that David reiterates time and time again throughout this novel, that God is cruel. But his cruelty, David says, is refining. And sometimes the cruelest thing that God can let us do is survive. So, plot: the story takes place in a desolated city of Desperation, somewhere in the desert of Nevada. Long ago, miners in the area, mostly Chinese slaves, dug too deep. Familiar story there. And they unleashed an ancient evil, Tak. And Tak's presence grew and grew. It became restless and finally ended up infesting people in modern times. These people went on a killing spree, and everybody in the town of Desperation was murdered. And finally, Tak possesses the body of a local sheriff, and the sheriff arrests different groups and individuals, people who are traveling through the area, locks them up in jail, in these jail cells, and then the people need to band together, figure out how to get out, and figure out what the hell is going on in Desperation, and they need to destroy Tak, the presence of evil. I absolutely love Desperation. It is a fantastic book. It's just an absolute firecracker of a novel. It hits the ground running. It starts with tension and excitement, and that rarely lets up through the entire, almost 600 pages. It's a big novel. It's the kind of novel I really like from Stephen King, where he's putting a large ensemble cast. You're not getting a huge ensemble like Needful Things or The Stand, or even like Tommyknock or something like that. But you do have a really interesting group of people that are together, banding together to fight an evil. And it's pretty well written. We're going to talk a little bit about the writing in just a minute, but as far as just the tension goes, it's one of his better books on the tension level, just because he's able to keep this. He's able to keep the reader just in his grasp the entire time. It's pretty incredible. And a lot of Stephen King books, and I usually like this about him, they take a while to get going. He is a deliberately paced, slow in the uptake kind of author, but not with Desperation. Desperation is just boom, it punches you in the face, and then it just keeps hitting you, and it's pretty brutal. It's violent. It's dark. It's one of his more fun novels in the sense. I think this is what a lot of people, when they think of Stephen King, they think of something like Desperation, and this is a good example of that kind of Stephen King novel. One problem that I do have with modern Stephen King, and I say this modern, I say this being post 1990 or so, is that he has somewhat lost touch with the way that modern people talk. This is especially true with younger characters, and that becomes more and more evident as time goes on and we get closer to now. It was really evident in Under the Dome. There were some teenagers in that who don't talk like any teenagers when that book was written. It's really, really obvious in Mr. Mercedes. There's some teenagers in that who I don't know what era they are from, but I sometimes I wish that Stephen King would just set all of his books in like the 1960s, 70s, or 80s, because that's the time where he really understands the pop culture and the slang. You know, all of his characters always sound like they grew up in the 50s or 60s. And that's totally true in Desperation. There is a young girl in this novel named Cynthia, and I believe she's supposed to be in her 20s, and she sounds like a stoner from the 70s. So that is kind of a problem. His folkiness doesn't translate as well to modern characters in the way that they talk, but he's still like a master storyteller, and so I can forgive him that trespass. And there are still many passages that are just expertly written, and sometimes you're reading through and it's like a little clunky, but then you'll just come to a passage and be like, holy crap, this is amazing. And I would say that the highs aren't quite as high in this as in some others, but the lows are also not quite as low. It's a really steady, solid book. There are some pretty heavy Dark Tower connections in here. I would say that I would bet that Stephen King considered the group of heroes in this a quartet. A quartet is a word that he made up for the Dark Tower to represent a group of heroes going on a quest. And it does feel like there are some similarities between this group of characters and Roland's quartet in the Dark Tower. Desperation also uses some of his other made-up language from the Dark Tower, the Cantoi, which are these human-animal hybrids. And they become kind of like they're mentioned a couple times in the book, and there are variations of them mentioned throughout this novel. And the novel does use a lot of made-up language that does sound very much like the Dark Tower. I would imagine that Nevada, the desert, could, like in some future or parallel weird world, actually become the wastelands from Dark Tower. I get that sense that King was kind of setting that up. But yeah, overall, I love Desperation. This was my second time reading it. I loved it when I first read it. I think I loved it more this time. I really got a lot out of it, especially David's struggle with his idea of God, and the religious aspect of the work was quite fascinating. And it's just it's a real like corker of a horror novel. So yes, very good. This is going to be another easy ranking here. So we have, of course, right now we have Tommyknockers at the top. We have Firestarter. And then we have our placard there for Desperation. I've been having a lot of fun drawing these little placards. And so we are going to say that Desperation is better than Firestarter. It is better than Tommyknockers. It's quite a bit better. I like it more than both of those quite a bit. So there is our ranking as of now. Desperation, the Tommyknockers, and Firestarter. So the ranking of King continues. And coming up next, a little preview. The next thing we're going to talk about, I believe, will be Skeleton Crew, which I just finished. I'm going to be doing a ranking of this. The Mist is going to be ranked separately. We'll talk about it in the same video, but The Mist is such an important work that I think it deserves to be talked about outside of the collection. And I'm also going to be doing a supplemental video where I'm going to be discussing 5 of the stories from this book with an old internet friend of mine who is a huge King fan and a really smart and intelligent guy. It's going to be a fun episode. We're going to talk about our favorite stories from this. And then after that, I think will be Needful Things, which I'm rereading right now and enjoying a lot. So, all right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video on Desperation, and I hope you continue to enjoy these ranking of King videos. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.